Let's start. So I want to welcome everybody to tonight's educational program, Understanding Cancer Clinical Trials and Research. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Bill Hurl. Bill has a PhD in biochemistry. He is the founder and CEO of Immunomic Therapeutics. He is currently developing. Did I say that correctly, Bill?
Close enough. Close enough.
Say it again.
It's Immunomic Therapeutics.
Immunomic Therapeutics.
It's not what I gave the lawyer, but that's what came back, so I just had to run with it.
Okay. He is currently developing new immune therapies for glioblastoma multiforme, GBM, Merkel cell carcinoma, a deadly form of skin cancer, and others. He is a board member of Hope Connections, which we so appreciate, and has expertise in immunology and immunotherapy. Bill, we're thrilled to have you here with us tonight, and I'm going to turn the program over to you. And my apologies for not being able to pronounce things tonight.
Don't worry about it.
Oh.
It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. We're just here to have a good discussion, and if we don't pronounce everything just right, that just goes right to the heart of the subject, which is science is not like the easiest thing to kind of manage from a vocabulary standpoint. So I'm going to share my screen, and I think if I show, let's see, show all windows. What we want to do is operate off of this one. So as we go through this, when we go a little bit further on and towards the end, what I'm going to do is kind of drop off from the PowerPoint deck and switch to a browser window so that we can kind of have a chance to do some on-the-fly analysis on the web, so we can help you work through this. Because I'm sure everybody understands that when it comes down to the biology terms that you use for understanding your health, it gets very complicated. And so a while ago, I had a lunch meeting with a group of bankers, not to pick out bankers in particular, but these were smart, intelligent guys. And I just said, hey, when was the last time you guys had a class in biology? And so they kind of scratched their heads. Maybe freshman year in college was the last time they saw a class in biology. And if you kind of fast forward to all of a sudden having to make really difficult decisions about your health based on a lot of terminology and concepts that at best you hadn't seen for perhaps decades. And it's a tough road to go. So what I want to try and do tonight is just help you kind of sort through what you need to know and move forward with the things that are really important. Okay, so let's go. This is about me. There's my email address, so it'll be on there. Just any of you want to contact me, it's billhurl@outlook.com is the easiest. And I've been working in immunology and immunotherapy for the last, 30 some years. So it's a passion of mine to be working in this field. And, we were mentioning just working in the brain cancer and the Merkel cell carcinoma, which is a rare but deadly skin cancer. These are really great opportunities to help treat people with terrible diseases. And that's kind of the focus of our efforts at work. So what I'm going to do is we just went through go through just introduction. And I want to take a couple of minutes and talk to you about internet safety. I think previously when I had done some of these seminars, I don't think this was such an issue, but frankly, the artificial intelligence has gotten to a point now where it's really scary. Almost like you can say, I don't know, broccoli on your phone, and the next thing you know, you open up a web browser and there's a Whole Foods ad for broccoli. How does it know this stuff? it's scary. So I also want to give you some thoughts or some ideas about how to protect yourself. Then just talk a little bit about science and the way that we use it and how we talk about it and how you can use it to at least get the most information out of it and where there's issues and problems with it. And then kind of where we go next is into using Google or any other search platform. And ultimately where I want to take you to is looking out at the clinical trials and looking at clinicaltrials.gov. And let's see, perhaps we can, if we have time, we'll test out the hypothesis. So just in terms of your personal security, I just want to ask you a question is when you're interested in something, do you just open a web browser and go? And if that's your kind of approach to looking at the internet, you're a little bit at risk for not protecting your identity. So there's a couple things that you can do that are really helpful. One costs a little bit of money, but is probably worth it, which is to use a virtual private network service, VPN. I use one that's called TunnelBear. There's one that's on TV now, I forgot what it's called. But these things, what they do is hide your location and your computer from the other side that you're talking with. So it's not, you see sometimes in these spy movies where websites and links are all linked all over the world and they can't figure out where it's coming from. Basically, that's what a VPN can do for you. So if you can, I would recommend using a VPN service. I noticed on my phone that AT&T now offers free VPN service as part of their normal data package. So if you have AT&T, you might want to check into that. So if you're not going to use a VPN, at the very least, use a private browsing tab in Chrome or Edge or whichever window or whatever system you use to search the internet. So usually in Edge, it's in the upper corner. You can just right click on it and it'll ask for in private browsing. And I think Chrome's got similar type of button in the upper right-hand corner. And at least that way, it kind of prevents your computer from accumulating cookies and information about you that's going to be shared once you visit a website. So I recommend at least doing that. Another thing is that as soon as you start doing some of these searches, you're going to want to get information. And the only way that people will give you information is if you give them an email account. So I've got about 10 different email accounts and I use them for different things. So like I have one account that I just use for golf stuff. And if I'm going to buy a golf item, I'll just put it on there because I know I'm going to get a bunch of golf junk mail and it makes it easy to scan through. With this obviously is much more important, but you should be able to open up a Gmail account in about 5 minutes, give it whatever name you want, any sort of alias, don't use your first and last name, and use that as your vehicle for interacting with websites, so that any email that's coming in and any garbage mail, if you want, you can always dump that email account and no harm, no foul, because it's not important. But it's something that you probably want to do. And then the last thing is go spend $25 and go buy a Cricket phone or a burner phone, or if you got an extra phone around, go over to the AT&T store and get a SIM card and add a line. But you don't want to be, if you're going to be making phone calls, you want it to be a dedicated phone so that all of a sudden, you don't inadvertently start mixing calls. And you want people that are that may, or you may make a mistake, and then all of a sudden you realize somebody that you didn't want to have your phone number has your phone number. At least if you have a separate line, you can kill that phone at any time, no problem. So it may seem like a little extreme, but I think those things are worth doing to protect yourselves. And then finally, just a good rule of thumb is no matter what you're using, if you don't recognize the source, don't open the link, don't answer the text, don't answer the phone. It's a dangerous world out there. So just be careful for yourself. You're dealing with sensitive information, and we have to take care. So does anybody have any questions about that? I'll just stop for a second.
Yes. What if somebody gets a email from you that you didn't send?
Yeah, that's a good one. I have to deal with that at work all the time.
I had it the other day.
The easiest way to do that is if you right click on the email address, you'll see the return address, and it won't be the same as the address that's in the to or from line. And so that is a really good way to identify spam. Also, like if somebody sends some, I always tell my people sometimes they'll get something from William. And I was like, well, I'm never sending you something from William. If it says William, it's junk, because I don't send that, and I never send you email anyway. So if it's unsolicited, it's not authentic.
But if it's your name being used to somebody else, that's what I meant.
Yeah, the people will hack your email and do that to try and get people to respond. And so what I'm saying is that if you look at the email address in the to or from line, so if you were to hit return, where it puts in a response, the name that's going to be actually filled out in the reply line, it might say Bill Hurl, but actually, if you right click on it and look at the actual email address, it'll be somewhere else. And so if it looks suspicious, it probably is. So, and the easiest way to check that out is to create a clean email and send it to whoever you got it from, whether it's me or somebody else, and just say, hey, I got an unusual email. Is this really from you? And you got to do those things these days.
I just wanted to add something, if I may.
Sure.
I've always tried to personalize the subject line for my messages to make them as specific as possible, so that when I get a very generic subject line message, I know that that's spam. So that's something that I do.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Usually, at least for my work emails, I have a little tombstone that I have on every email I write, so people would know that if that's not there, that's not authentic. So yes, that's an excellent strategy just to make sure. And you see so many of these fake emails have terrible grammar. I would be embarrassed if I didn't know the difference between TWO and TO, but it's out there. Anybody else? Thank you for those comments. That's very helpful. So let's talk a little bit about the language of science. And so I've been working in this area, started graduate school in around 1980. So I've been in this for obviously the vast majority of my lifetime. And basically this is where I've always kind of boiled it down to this, is that, if you're familiar with the Rosetta Stone kind of became the key to translating the Egyptian hieroglyphics, because it had an inscription with ancient Greek and the other scripts and ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. And so they were able to make a translation from one language to the other. Well, we don't have that in science. And so a lot of the terms that we use rather freely and assume that everybody else knows, nobody else knows. And it becomes a real challenge, particularly as you might want to go look at scientific papers. You're like, well, how do I make head or tails of this stuff? And so it's not so easy. And I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a guidepost on that as to how I would recommend going about it. But overall, it's unless you're an expert in the field, you're not going to be able to make head or tails of it. And one of the things that you see, and this is actually some data from our work in brain cancer. So you might look at this and say, I can't make head or tails of that. What does that mean? And is it any good or what? And so this is something that actually many cancer patients, we all get to have this moment where the doctor comes in and says, well, here's what your survival curve looks like. And we can either be, cautiously optimistic or totally depressed or whatever. And basically what you're looking at is a very small subset of patients that went through a specific treatment and had this kind of result. Does that mean that it would apply to you? Not necessarily. Does it mean it could apply to you? It could. But the thing is, you kind of look at this and you say, well, how do you make head or tails of this? And so almost every paper that you would read in clinical oncology is going to have one of these survival curves in it. And I'll be honest with you, when I look at a paper, it's I turn to the back just to see this page, because this is what you would say is where the rubber meets the road. Because what you're looking at here, just try to explain to you, is that this was a small study. So there was only 6 patients in the control arm and 6 patients in the test arm. And in glioblastoma, normally patients live 12 to 14 months on average. But the people that got treated, half of them lived a really long time and did really well. And the same as that was how long it took before they progressed, and then overall survival in the second one, they had very good survival. So you would look at it and say, this is worth pursuing and following up on, which is what I would be my take on this paper. And every paper that you see is going to have one of these curves. And if you're going to try to learn anything, I guess, out of the papers that you're going to look at, this is the one piece of data that you should try to understand. And that is simply look at whatever they use as a control arm, so this dotted line, versus the patients that got some treatment, which is this line, and look and see, did they do better? And that's really the key element for any research paper. The rest of the paper is going to be full of a lot of subtleties and a lot of miscellaneous information that you don't really need to dive into. But I would just recommend, kind of getting familiar, at least, or looking at some of these. And these are called Kaplan-Meier plots. And, we can perhaps take a couple minutes at the end and look at some other options for this. But you can look at this type of forecast that's in papers in a whole variety of types of cancers. It's every drug that's out there now has plots the survival benefit. So what you're looking for is for the treated arm to be moving to the right. So as long as the treatment arm is moving to the right, the drug is working. If the treatment arm was going the other way and say it was down here, it would mean that the treatment arm was detrimental. And if it's right on top of the control line, it didn't do anything. So in some ways, maybe that can help you if you're looking at considering clinical trials, how to sort some of these out. I know that's probably generally I say I don't teach any science, but this is the one slide I think it's worth teaching you. So I'm going to stop and let you ask questions about it because it's really important.
May I ask a question about that?
Sure.
So if a study, if the treatment line exactly matches the control line, what's the incentive for the researchers to publish that? Isn't that kind of a non-event? They've looked at a new treatment, it hasn't worked, so they just walk away?
Yeah, that's pretty much what happens. I mean, there's a lot of those studies, but what they would most likely conclude at the end is perhaps propose some alternatives for improving the study. The clinicians at the academic institutions and the NIH have the ability to not have a one and done mentality like you would see in a pharma company. Okay, anything else? We can come back to this later if there's some other questions. So, like I said earlier on, it's next to impossible for the average person to sort out scientific reports. But if you're going to do it, don't use Google, use Google Scholar. Google Scholar gets right to the meat of it. And after we finish the slide deck and we go on the internet, you'll see the difference. And so the Google itself is fine for general overviews. Now, Google's kind of made a change in the way they present their information. It used to be that the output for a search was really dominated by ads for the first 2 pages. At least in the cancer pages, it doesn't seem to be the case anymore. But you want to probably avoid sponsored sites, because if somebody's sponsoring the site, they're selling you something. And I think that's kind of contrary to where your objective is in terms of understanding. So I would use a Google search for a good overview. And I'm going to show you a couple sites that are really helpful. And then if you're ready to dig in, you can go to Google Scholar. And so let's, I don't know if I can, that's easy to see. That's a little hard to see. I think I did a search on breast cancer there, and you get a lot of papers. We're going to go back and I said, we'll call up the browser window and we'll actually look through the actual publications. And what we want to be able to do with this, and the reason actually using Google Scholar would be important for you, is because you want to be able to link a discovery that you make in the clinicaltrials.gov and an active clinical study with the historical research that goes with that clinical study. Just to make sure that the researcher that has the open clinical study has been actively publishing on this and has some data, and maybe he has something that would make you get excited about wanting to reach out and contact him. So Google Scholar gives you the technical results, and we're going to look at when we switch over to that, how to read some of those papers so we get the information that's useful for us. So really the most practical use of your search time is that, in this section, I got a typo, as always. You want to learn how to make the connection with clinical sites, and then you want to really understand how to take the information that you're finding and how to get that to your doctor. So remember that everything that you want to do ultimately needs to run through the doctor that is your primary doctor, your medical oncologist, the person you trust the most. And whichever category those doctors fall in, that's the most important thing that I think you can do is, as you find things, go and ask your doctor to investigate it for you. They're in a better position to make some of those phone calls than you are. And if you can come up with something that seems reasonable, they should have no problem making a phone call to another clinician. So when you start working, I think there's a few different sites that are really useful. Perhaps the most comprehensive site, in fact, it's so comprehensive, it's almost overwhelming, is at the National Cancer Institute. So that's www.cancer.gov. And it is really outstanding. The other site that I really like is published by the American Society of Clinical Oncologists, and that is cancer.net. And so both of those sites will get you the general information about what to expect from the kind of treatment that your doctor is going to recommend, what's common, what's going to be the effect of the drugs, and how to go to your doctor and ask intelligent questions. So that both of those sites are really good launch pads into that. And then if you want to take it into another level, similar to Google Scholar is the National Library of Medicine, the PubMed website, which covers all of the medical literature that's available through the National Library of Medicine, an excellent site. And then finally, the thing that you really most want to spend your time with and understand is clinicaltrials.gov. So cancer.net, it's a very clean website. It's very easy to navigate. And we'll go take a look at these live in just a second. Now, all of this is leading to, why, when you're doing your research for your circumstance, what is your goal? Really, what is it you're looking for? The best possible outcome for treating you. So academic researchers and pharmaceutical companies conduct studies using new and experimental drugs to determine if they are improvements in treatment over existing care. Right now, on average, only about 5% of cancer patients actually participate in clinical studies. Maybe some of that is regionally oriented because I think people in more remote places just don't have a good way to get to a major research center. But the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of inherent resistance to kind of having this idea that, hey, maybe I might be a guinea pig. I think it's a true decision for everybody that each person has to make, but it's good to ask the question and decide with your doctor and the consultation of the clinician if something makes sense. So you probably heard this, but there's three main phases of a clinical study. So the first one is a safety study, and the design, it has the goal of obviously proving whether it's safe and documenting safety, and also if the new drug provides some sort of clinical benefit. So when we say a safety study, the drug has already been tested in a very large analysis across animals, and depending on the nature of the drug, that could be non-human primates, could be dogs, rabbits, mice, or rats. So any of those, what you're looking for is just toxicity. And that study is rigorous, and it's one of the areas where I think the FDA does its best job, is that it doesn't allow new clinical studies of unsafe drugs. And it's not to say that there can't be a rare case where there's an odd side effect, because nobody knows until you do them. but that usually is not the bigger issue. The other bigger issue is in a pharmacological setting, does the drug actually work? So if you've done phase 1 and you see that you've got some clinical benefit, you move into phase 2, which is designed to see how many doses are required to get an effect, and you need more than one type of drug. Is there a benefit to combining therapies? So it's a more complicated study. And then finally, phase 3 is designed to collect the statistical muscle to provide the information and the data necessary to get a new drug on the market. So as you're doing these and as you look at them, phase 1 is the biggest unknown because there's no necessarily detailed information as to whether a drug works or not. But in that study, they're almost all open label, which means you know whether you're getting the drug or not. Phase 2 is sometimes blinded. And so you may be randomized into a group that gets just a standard of care versus the group that gets the new drug. And so that's the challenge that you have there because you don't know it, you're blinded. And then phase 3 is a larger study, and very often those are open label as well. So as we go through the options, I guess I don't have if you can get into a phase 2 that's open label, I think that might actually be your best bet. A term that you often hear in terms of clinical studies is placebo. And so a lot of times I think when we think about placebo, you're thinking, oh, that's a sugar pill. You know, somebody is getting an aspirin or a sugar pill, we see if they get improvement on their pain. Well, in clinical studies, placebo is generally used to describe the comparator arm for the treatment, but it doesn't mean that the patients aren't getting treated. They're just getting what they would be getting otherwise if they weren't in the clinical study. So there's a certain amount of risk in going into a study that's placebo controlled because you don't really know whether you're getting the treatment or not. But under any circumstances, you at least know you're getting at minimum what you've been getting under the worst, you know, under any circumstances, which is standard of care. So don't think of if you're going into a placebo study, that means you're going to be untreated. That's not allowed. And I said open label just tells the patients whether they know which study arm they're in. So if you can get open label studies, that's beneficial to you. And so as you go through this, as we'll see, you know, take your time and read all the information carefully. And in this particular case, don't get bogged down in the science, terminology. All you really want to do is look at the issues that are related to whether you qualify or not, and what would be a disqualifier. And so we'll see that in just a minute because we'll go through that. And then most importantly, I think, is that you read about the principal investigator. And this is where you link back into Google Scholar and find that particular principal investigator so that you can see if they're going to be the right person for you. And you should never be afraid to call their office. As I said, there's only 5% of patients that do clinical studies right now. They need you. So anybody that's calling in that's a potential enrollee for their clinical study, they should roll out the red carpet for you. And then as you look at it, you know, I think that we'll look at some of these sites. Since they need you, right? There's a lot of things that are out there to help you make your decision, and if you decide to take the treatment, how to participate. So a lot of them offer some sort of travel fund so they can pay to get you to the site, and they're interested in having you be a participant. And the other part of it is and this is something that you have to talk with your doctor, is that you don't want to be getting a treatment that might have side effects that might disqualify you for a therapy you think you might want in the future. So, for example, if you get a type of inflammatory, so like well, I'm thinking of the drug, Yervoy. So Yervoy often causes the patients to require steroids. Well, as soon as the patient goes on steroids, they're going to be disqualified from other immuno-based clinical studies for probably 6 months. And that might not be a big deal, but it might be a huge thing. And so you have to ask these questions like, well, what side effects might keep me from getting something else that I want? And that's where your conversation with your doctor really becomes very helpful. So let's go ahead. I think that's the last one. I'm going to stop the share and let me switch to my browser. So while I'm doing that, does anybody have any questions?
You've been talking about clinical trials for prescription medications, but there are also clinical trials for different surgical and radiological techniques. Would anything you say be different if we were looking for those kind of clinical trials?
No, actually, I mean, they're all kind of in the same boat. And we'll go ahead and go through that in just a second. So, because you can see that for yourself. Does anybody have a topic they want to throw in here? We can just try one out that you recommend. Breast cancer, colon cancer, skin cancer, melanoma. What's your?
Well, why don't we try the skin cancer that President Biden had removed?
Oh, that was
Basal cell. Yeah.
Okay. So when you see, these are what's come up now is all different reports. And so to me, anything that's older than 2 or 3 years is probably not very useful. So, because if you look at some of these as this is a review article from 2005, not very useful. So let's at least go with since 2022. Probably plenty of papers for the last year and a half. So in this case, now you start looking at, here's a title that's somewhat promising, I guess. This is a treatment for basal cell carcinoma using a PD-1 drug. So let's see what that looks like. Let's make this a little bigger. So when you get a paper like this, a couple things that you want to look at right away is, all right, the authors. So if you have any questions, I mean, you can see Dr. Lewis is at the University of Colorado, same for Dr. Davis and both. And you would think they're probably basal cell carcinoma experts. And so normally when I get a paper like this, and without really looking at, not that long of a paper, but I generally look at the first paragraph and read the initial introduction, because this is a pretty good overview of what's going on with the disease. And then kind of skip ahead, because the rest of it starts to get into minutia. And you don't really want to get into it. Well, so the question is, do they have a piece of data? So no. They don't have any data. So they don't have a graph. So generally when that happens, what I go to is the last paragraph, and in the last sentence for the most part. So in the study, let's see, basically they're saying this particular drug was effective for basal cell carcinoma. So that's encouraging. But reading through the rest of that paper is a waste of time. And you could spend hours sifting through all that. But it's better just to go read the first paragraph, the last couple sentences, and you're pretty good to go. Let's see. Let's see. So here's a review article from it was on that one. Let's see. So, and this is let's see where this group is from. So that whenever you're looking at any of these things, the last author is the one that matters. And so B is at St. Luke and Easton. You might be interested in the doctor at Yale, Eva Pan. One of these two would be the person that I would, if I would call that if I had a question. They're the ones that are driving the study. And again, you just look at the top description and then kind of jump ahead to the end. And they give you a model. Who cares? Nice picture, but it's not really something you want to look at. Now, all right, here we go. So we can scan that up a little bit. So in this case, here's your survival for the basal cell carcinoma and progression-free survival for these patients. Half of the patients lived 1.5 years without any recurrence or any progression, and then went on from there. And then in spite of the recurrence, then the overall survival, still didn't reach the midpoint survival. 90% of the patients were still alive at 2 years. So it's not a highly dangerous disease by most standards. Now, one of the things that you've always got to remember is that as you're looking at these studies, the patients that are in these studies, you're looking at something that's perhaps not relevant to you. They may or may not be. Use the same patients that are relevant to you. Oops, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go back to. For 1 second, these vertical tabs will help me get through this. Okay. So let me show you. First of all, I was telling you about the Comprehensive Cancer Information Center. So this is the National Cancer Institute, and in this case, they have every type of cancer that you would want to investigate, and gives you access to some of the best researchers in the world. So I think that's very helpful. The other one, as I mentioned, was cancer.net, which is a website that I like a lot because it seems very clean and easy to follow, and gives you a little bit more information, particularly in terms of kind of providing emotional support, which, as you know, with Hope Connections, that's important for us. So we're going to spend a lot of time going through these. You can spend days going through these different pages, but it gives you a good idea of what the overview is. Let's get back to the key thing, which is how to find something that's important to you. So clinicaltrials.gov is one of the greatest resources that you have for researching your disease. So let's somebody want to volunteer a condition or disease. All right. In the absence of the one, I'll pick one. I'm going to put in triple negative breast cancer. And I'm sure that kind of for the most part, we're just going to be interested in the United States. And we could actually just be interested in studies based in Maryland. And within, I don't know, 100 miles. Okay. So now we do the search. And you're going to see that there's 98 studies for triple negative breast cancer being conducted in Maryland. So where do we go with this approach? First of all, we get a few more results on the page. Anything that's terminated is probably not something that's going to be very helpful to you, because you can't get into a terminated study. So you're interested in the ones that are recruiting. So we would put in recruiting and apply that. Okay. So STEMVAC in patients with early stage triple negative breast cancer. So this is I'm sure some sort of cell therapy, and it's being conducted at Johns Hopkins University. And so let's take a look at this one. So when you go through these, and there's almost no way to do it except to go through it by brute force, unfortunately. The original sponsor is the University of Washington, collaborators, National Cancer Institute, and the University of Wisconsin. And they will give you a list of patients that are able to participate in the disease. And it's a phase 2 study. So in this case, it describes patients will get STEMVAC vaccine for 3 months for some period of time. And the actual start date just started. It's actually just a one-year study, so this will be going on very quickly. So if you look at it, and this seems something that might be appropriate for your circumstance, if you just kind of look down and look at the eligibility criteria, you look to see if the requirements are in there, you probably would know most of these things. You go right down to right here where it says contacts. And you want to contact Kim Mast at the University of Wisconsin. And if the alternative too is to contact the Hopkins Breast Cancer Trials line, a number here. And at Johns Hopkins, the lead doctor is Santa Maria. So you could call him and speak with him directly and tell him that you're interested in the study. So the stepwise then is you find a study that you're interested, you find a site that you're interested, you get a contact information, and then you've got a name. So let's see if Dr. Santa Maria has published. So let's go to PubMed, and let's put in the doctor and let's see what turns up. Come on. We got a small list here. Let's see. Who's the other doctor? I forgot the other doctor's name. Actually, you can go back there. We could put in back into. Let's put in STEMVAC. That might be interesting. And there's no right way or wrong way to do this. You just kind of keep STEMVAC triple negative breast cancer. Okay, so here's a paper on the actual work that's been done. So we can actually then go look at the paper and see what they turned up on that. So this is actually the results from the phase 1 study. And so you can see it elicits an important T cell response. And then they're continuing, they got good enough data to continue their research. So and it won an award. So I guess that's a good thing. So that's sort of my process as I look at it, is that you just put in a couple different options and you just start going through the sites that are open and recruiting. And you can look in the interventions, it tells you what the drug is, and it tells you where on the up here on the far right column, where you can go to get it. And we just limited it to Maryland, but you can expand that to as many states as you want, or no states at all. You can go coast to coast. And one of the things that you'll see in some of these is, if we take this out, sometimes you have some of these where they actually have results. So for example, here's one that has results. So let's see what happened with this guy. Study results. And so in this case, overall study, they had 49, 43 completed, 6 didn't complete. And let's see what happened with that. So you look at it, I mean, you just kind of have to get a sense as to whether you think the patients had some value. And I'm not sure which one was a control group. Wild type, triple negative. So perhaps the second group was close to a normal. And I don't know if there's anything really distinguishes one from the other. But even with any of these studies, you always have the ability to go to this site. I recommend this very highly. Look at the name of the researcher, find out who the contact person is, and just pick up the phone and give them a call. They will interview you quickly and make an assessment as to whether they have something for you. Even if this study is closed, I guarantee you they have other studies. So this one is at the NIH. Something that you need to have in order to be successful of this and make the most out of it is you need to have your own case file fully prepared. You don't want to be scrambling around trying to find a scan or a pathology report or a description of the primary tumor or anything like that. All of that stuff has to be in a very simple format that you can get to any of these doctors, because the first thing they're going to say is, send me your scans, send me your case history, and I'll tell you what I can do. So please keep that in mind, that is the right thing to have for yourself, is your case history, any surgeries, any drugs you're taking now, anything that the doctor should know that you would want them to have in advance. And then let them comment. They'll give you their advice for free. And there's nothing wrong with free advice. You don't have to take it. So I see I'm up on a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to stop. And I'll just let you ask whatever questions you might want to have.
Can I ask about, when you say case history, is there a standard format for this, or is this something that I would get from my doctor? I would ask, can you give me my case history, or what does this comprise?
Yeah, they should be able, actually, your doctor's records should be able to give you a summary of your diagnosis. So it would be a summary of your diagnosis, all of your procedures, and any of your scans. One thing that a lot of the new types of drugs often require is HLA typing. And so it's an immunological marker that's on your white blood cells. And if you've never had HLA typing done, it takes 2 or 3 months to get it done. It's worth asking about. Can I get this? It's not always intuitively obvious why you need it until you need it. And then you're sitting there waiting 2 or 3 months for a result. But the doctor's office can give you a good summary of your diagnosis and disease and put it together for you.
What are you saying? HLE?
HLA, A is an atom.
A, thank you.
So
Yes,
Dr.
Mo?
Pearl, I've looked at clinicaltrials.gov in the past. I have metastatic breast cancer, and my doctor has, as of yet, not really been looking at clinical trials with me because we've been trying available treatments. But when I have looked in the past, the requirements on some of the trials, I've been struck by the fact that the information you're talking about in terms of a sort of a case history, I have my copies of all my reports, and depending, the information isn't there. Like depending, the pathology they didn't analyze for that, they analyzed for something else, and I guess I'm trying to figure out how to do an effective search.
Sometimes it requires a little bit of legwork on your part. I can't count the number of times I had to go down to the NIH records office to get a report from them because somehow or other it got lost. And so if you kind of keep track of every place you've ever been, they have the records and you can get it. And so actually, once you get it, it kind of becomes your most precious piece of property, I think.
And depending, my
format
doctor
is
can
it?
explain some of that, right? My doctor
Yeah.
can explain some of it in theory.
What format is it in, Bill? Is it on CDs or?
Well, I mean, obviously the scans are CDs, but most of it is just paper. So what you would normally want to do is take it home and scan it onto a PDF. Or, just take a picture of it on your phone and let your phone convert it to a PDF.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I don't know, maybe I've gone through it so many times over time that I can rattle it off without too much trouble. But I think it's helpful to have your own little dossier together for yourself, so that you don't miss anything, and the doctor has the best understanding of your circumstances.
I wanted to ask to go back a bit about the role of your own doctor and at what stage you would involve your doctor in exploration of a clinical trial. The way you mapped it out was, you research, as you've suggested, clinicaltrials.gov, you research the principal investigators, and then you call them up and you explore participation. But wouldn't there be a step in the middle there somewhere where you would go to your doctor and say, listen, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? Do you have any input on it? And would that be an in-person meeting, or could it be done through a portal? How would that practically happen?
Yeah, I mean, you can. It just depends on your comfort with your doctor and kind of the relationship that you have. Fortunately, when you go into a clinical study, unfortunately for the doctor, if you go into a clinical study is free. right? So you're kind of off of the medical oncologist role, and you're not a paying customer anymore. So there's a little bit of a, I don't want to say, I don't want to cause any cast any aspersions against anybody, but I mean, that's just a fact of life, is that if you leave a practice to start a clinical study, they lost a cost center. So, I mean, I guess the way that my wife and I always kind of approach things is we investigated it, and if we thought it was for us, then we went in and said, hey, we were thinking about doing this study. If the study's not going to be, if the doctor that's running the study says, hey, it's not for you, well, then you don't need to waste anybody's time with it. But I would say, the whole issue of second opinions seems to get everybody a little bit riled up for some reason, and it's not really, doesn't make sense to me, because the way I look at it, if some other doctor confirms your strategy for treatment, then that should be viewed favorably. And if the doctor's got another alternative, you should be able to hear those alternatives. Now, on the other side of the coin, that's not to say that these guys that are running the clinical studies don't have motivations as well, because they need patients to fill their study up, and they're eager to get somebody in that might fit and help them get an answer to their study. So there's a little bit of tug of war on both sides. Maybe that's why only 5% of patients end up in clinical studies. So I think that we do face a challenge as a patient, and I think the number one thing that you always have to remember is that you're your own best advocate. When it comes down to it, it's your health, it's your call, and that's what really matters. If you think you're making the right decision, doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's your health.
Thank you.
Bill, thank you so much. Every time you give this presentation, I always learn something, and even relearning something, and from Google Scholar, because I don't think most people that doesn't roll off our tongues when we say Google, right? And just also too being mindful of when we do go to certain sites, or just search things on our computer, because I think not only do we not want people tracking us for broccoli, but we definitely don't want them tracking us for things that are very personal, like our health.
Yes.
And so I think that, too, that's such an important reminder. And just, your slides, I think, just also to really point out, how we start this process and how we go through this process, because it is a process.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy to have helped tonight, and if anybody has any follow-up questions, send me a note or give me a call, whatever. I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very
And
much.
thank you all
Thank
for being here tonight. And I'll have the slides at some point if anybody's interested, but
It should be in your
really,
inbox.
I took a lot of notes. Say that again?
I said you should have got them right there in your inbox.
Oh,
I-
okay. I didn't see them, but they probably are.
There, send me another email and I'll send them again.
Okay. Yeah, the last presenter, she had to send it in a PDF file because for whatever reason it wasn't coming through. So I don't know if there's a block. Hope Connections could have a block. Yeah, because I think it took her like 3 times to send me her slides.
Oh, good heavens. Well, hopefully everybody got some benefit out of this, and I said it's my pleasure to be able to spend some time with you all this evening, and feel free to contact me anytime.
Thank you so much, Bill. We really appreciate it.
You
And
bet.
thank you everybody for being here. Hope everybody has a good night.
Yes, good night.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.